Yes. Folks. It's good to be here. I want to welcome you to a new show. This show's called History in a Bombshell. Oh, what these things have done. I want to tell you what this show's going to be about. It's not going to be your normal show. A normal show, history show, will go and focus on specific things. I will be picking a topic, and I'm sure you'll figure it out in a second as to where we're headed, but I tend to look at history from really far away. Some people call it macro history. Some people call it big history. And I know some of you will even, at some point, call me a revisionist, which is not the case. Just know that my point of view is going to be different than everyone else's point of view, just like your point of view is going to be different than everyone else's point of view. I want you to understand that we all are going to come from different places and different perspectives, and this is just mine. If you don't like it, take to Twitter. I'm sure this show will make Twitter and Facebook fun again for me as you guys respond. But I do want to say thank you for watching, and those of you who followed my other shows, thanks for coming over to this one. But this one is strictly history. We're going to talk about, well, like I said, I'm going to pick a topic. I'm going to step back from it. We're going to talk about the big picture. We're going to talk about Earth and trends. So we're going to remove this magnifying glass, and we're going to decide on really what's a human, how a human ticks, and are we going to make these mistakes again and successes again? And I'm just a struggling high school history teacher who enjoyed standing in front of his students and doing this same macro look at things to just get perspective. I think we take the minutia of everything, and we don't give time, and we love hindsight. I tell my students all the time that you got to take hindsight out of history and you'll understand it better. Just be at the moment and progress. One of the subjects I teach is the Holocaust, and if you can't take that giant number, that giant ass number, 6 million plus people, 11 if you add the others, and remove it, and you don't understand how you get there. And my students, I will ask them, why didn't the Jews just leave? And they'll just be like, they should have, they're stupid. I don't understand why they just stuck around. And I said, it's because they did not know the history like you do. So we're going to try and remove the hindsight and look at trends as a whole. That's what I want to look at, trends. Something like this. I accuse my high school students of wanting to do less work constantly. Why don't you do your homework? Why do you take pictures of your neighbor's homework and send it to each other? This collective communist way of doing work. And they say, it's easy. I mean, I get my work done. And I was like, would I have copied it like that when I was their age? And so that's the minutia part. I want to back away and say, look, maybe society as a whole is starting to work less. We are. And in 100, 200, 300 years, give or take speed bumps, will we have gotten to a point where we don't have to work and everything's a hobby? And if you don't feel like doing anything at all, you don't have to. Are we just in the middle of that? And so these trends, this way of thinking of things, is kind of how I'm going to look at history. So if you don't like that, if you don't like different perspectives and stuff, just click off and move on to the next struggling high school teacher. Just attempting to pass on knowledge to the future in any way they can. I call myself a thinker, and I think many of you who are going to somehow be attracted to this show at some point or be told about it are thinkers too. But just really get into things and how they work and why. You know, I'm a fan of nature over nurture over nature. This idea that we are sculpted by our surroundings. Now you should know that nature may change if we started this idea of genetic engineering, because then we are manipulating the nature part and perhaps changing the future of humans. But that can still be argued to be nurture. So I am definitely a product of my environment, and I hope those of you who stick around long enough to see exactly where I'm coming from, because that's the only way you can understand history, is to know who's telling it to you at the time. So I'm a high school teacher, been teaching for a long time. My kids tend to like me, most of them. You can't make everyone happy. And I don't know, I hope you guys stick around. It's going to be fun. I hope it's controversial. I mean, not controversial enough to lose my job, but I definitely want to look at these human interactions. And the biggest human interaction that I tend to study is that of the world wars. And not to step on other historians' toes, and I'm going to. Clearly, the topic I'm going to choose is going to be stepping on toes. Just the perspective that I hope is different. But World War I is an incredible time period, and we're going to start at the end of it and look at what happens then, this mindset of humans. So, I know as a child, many of you have the same fascination with the wars. They're massive, absolutely massive in scale. You know, collectively, you can argue 90 to 100 million people are going to lose their lives, and countless others are affected forever. The world is affected forever. For boys like me, it may have been the violence, the loss of life, the immensity of these, and for girls, for women, it might have been the family struggles and the structure of the role of the woman changing so much. It just may have been the start of the women's movement. So, but all in all, these wars are just monstrous to history. And one of my goals is not to show you that we may be nearing a third or anything like that, but I'm going to point out certain little things that we're doing again. So how and why do we do these? And how are we not, as humans, spending every dollar and every brain cell we have avoiding wars, especially the big ones? And, I don't know, guys. Do we like them? I mean, there's this definite, romance about war. I know I'm guilty of it. I'm totally guilty of it. War movies are like, war porn. We love watching it. I know it's not real. That's why it's okay. But, even when you're watching the real videos of the guys running out of the trenches super fast because of the film, or the tanks rolling across Europe, I don't know. Is it the immensity that makes us love it? Is it the epicness? Is it, the good versus evil that that we'll have in these wars, especially the second? And do we understand the hardship that comes with these wars? And I have to be honest, I don't. I think we have lost the respect for the hardship that can come about from war. So take my generation. I'm a Cold War kid. I'm 37 at the moment. My grandparents both fought. Grandfathers both fought in World War II. And both my grandmothers, of course, participated as the home front. 4 members of my family lived through and dealt with this immense period. Life-changing event. All the boys leaving. Letters. I've read all my grandmother's and grandfather's letters to each other. I've done as much research as I can into my own family. One grandfather was a tail gunner of the Flying Fortress, and another was infantry in the Battle of the Bulge, and he was captured. So we'll talk about that later, him being captured. But the fact that the 2 of them can't talk about it makes me respect that time. I don't want to feel like they do. I mean, Is there a jealousy of not joining the military? And I want you guys to know that my respect for the military is absolutely immense. Immense. Veterans deserve way more than we give them. And we tend to forget about them when they come back. But I never served. And there's still a human part of me, or just a part of me, that regrets that. And, this greatest generation, we call them the greatest generation. They deserve it. They didn't have a choice. And the ones who survive can now live with this knowledge that they participated in one of the greatest events in the history of man. And won, if you're on our team. And won, USA. And is it because my generation paid attention to them? And we grew up in the Cold War, and the Cold War reminded us constantly of this good versus evil and anti-communism. You're going to see that I haven't broken that. I haven't broken the anti-communism stuff, guys. So know that perspective. I despise this idea of shared wealth. But take our kids. Now, I don't have any kids yet, but I'm definitely teaching this age group, the millennial, and now into Generation Z, and they have absolutely no clue. They have absolutely zero respect for, I don't want to say zero respect for history, but they're close. But they have zero respect for war, and which is weird because they were born during one. So maybe it's because it's this downside of an Iraq war, which isn't, it's going to sound terrible to people who served in it, and some of my best friends have, but Iraq was not a true war. It was 90% versus 10% technology. And yes, if you say that a 30-day war, how many days it was from start to finish, was the actual war, then that's not a war. Now, occupation and things like that, yes, terrible. What we had to go through, but it's impossible for a millennial or the next generation to even remotely understand this idea of fighting for your country, or even just being proud of it. Do you realize that I have to remind them to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance? And at the moment, we have this movement to not do it for certain reasons. And I'm not sure that'll change with the present election that we just had with the election of Donald Trump as president. I'm not sure I'll talk too much about that. But we do have the idea of the Vietnam War. It's back there. How terrible it was. We tend to just say it can't happen again. We blame it on the government. And I'll argue that Iraq is similar. But do we just forget? So this is where the bombshell comes. One of the first. My students once got me so pissed off because they just didn't care about a topic or about our country. It could have been the fact that they don't even realize what Veterans Day is for. And I told them, if you guys keep this up, which they may or may not be able to help, if you guys keep this up, when I'm, in my 40s, a true voter, the groups that vote tend to be the older group, we will gladly vote for you to have to go fight a war. And they took offense, which I'm sure they're, allowed to. Kind of told them I want them to go struggle, some die, which would probably get you fired in the long run. But digress. I think Earth, maybe not parts of it. The Syrians definitely don't need a lesson in hardship, but I think the collective part of Earth, the common Western world has lost the respect from those two world wars. I think we have. And, we did the whole, what if draft when we do the Vietnam, and I'll tell you that every student says they won't go except for 3 at the beginning. We have some ROTC students that thankfully are getting a lesson in civic pride in our country and vets, because their teachers are true vets, and we have 7 at our school, which is awesome. Some of them say they'll just go to jail, and I'm just this is stupid. Why are we having this discussion when you're clearly too immature to understand the goal of protecting one's right to freedom. They are so spoiled in their freedom that they don't even realize that you sometimes have to fight for it. And it's a bummer to a historian, a teacher. It's loss of pride. And maybe in a few centuries or millennia we'll have completely progressed from violence in the way we handle things. But at the moment, let's not be naive. We will have more wars. We will have to deal with them, and the United States will be a part of them. We have placed ourselves in the driver's seat of the world. And in this driver's seat, there are constant cars around us attempting to either run us off the road or be protected by us as they're being run off the road. So, some say we may have learned some of these lessons. I would argue we have not. We will have another Holocaust. It just may not be Jewish people. We will have another large war, and it just may be with protective suits and robots and, human incapacitation devices, where maybe, just maybe, and I got laughed at for this 10 years ago, Screw Time magazine, maybe, just maybe, we will have wars where it won't be about killing the enemy. It will just simply be about making them unable to fight. Hence the word casualty, those of you who've studied war. We will have more large population shifts. You guys are seeing the effects of one now from the Syrian refugees and African refugees and even South America for the United States. Look, we have a guy touting, I'm going to build a wall, and you have Europe actually building them. So we will deal with population shifts in the future, especially with the population growing. And, this aspect of watching birth rates is something that people forget. One of the motivators for war is an enemy's birth rate. And at the moment, we have stopped reminding ourselves of this aspect. And, I think the country of India, the president came out and said every mother should have 5 children. And to a historian, to a war historian, that simply means you're getting ready for war. You're already the second most populous country on earth. Why are you pushing for humans? And perhaps it is because you'll be fighting in 15 to 20 years. And having all these people ready will, of course, help you win, especially if it's with Pakistan and or China. These population issues also may range around releasing pathogens to fix it. Wars tend to do it naturally. But if you think of the scheme of things, even the 2 world wars, 90 million people, is really not that much. If it's one and it happens to be your family member, it is much. But remember, we're looking at things in a macro sense. So please don't take offense to these things. You guys should know this future's dicey. It's going to be both wonderful, things like our smartphones, like a GoPro, a camera, stuff that would have cost tens of thousands of dollars 10 years ago. Now I can pick up for a few hundred and then go on the internet and everyone on earth could view this video. The world has some amazing things, but we have a lot of speed bumps that we're going to have to deal with. Lots of speed bumps in humanity. And my goals are to challenge some of you guys' perspectives and point of views on these topics. And if you get offended, you shouldn't. And I'll tell you why, because history doesn't get offended. Earth clearly doesn't get offended, because if they did, you would be asking the family poisoning mass murderer Alexander the Great why he did what he did in a different light than we do now. Or the genocidal Scipio Africanus, whether history remembers what he did to the Carthaginians. Do you take offense by what those 2 men did? History looks at them in a wonderful light. Alexander gets the Great added to the end of his name. And Scipio is so famous for, putting a beating on the people in Africa, he gets to put Africa after his name. Julius Caesar killed hundreds of thousands of people in his goal to remain in power. And yet we look back and say how amazing these people are. So, credit to Dan Carlin here. A big fan of Dan Carlin's podcast. He was one of the first people to point out the aspects of How crazy would it be if in a 500 years there's books written about the great Hitler, which would be crazy. But this is what happens. Alexander the Great, Charlemagne. The guy gets credit for spreading Christianity, but he spread it by killing people. And I love Charlemagne. I absolutely love Alexander the Great. I love Caesar. These epic people in history, but am I going to love Hitler? Is the future going to love Hitler? They're going to love Pol Pot? So, history doesn't hold offense for these Carthaginians. History doesn't hold offense for the Persians. The Chinese dealing with Genghis and the Muslims defending themselves in the Crusades. Nobody's offended by that anymore. But should you be offended how the Germans and the Jews are remembered? Are we getting controversial now? How are we going to remember this? And this is why some people criticize the Jewish people for overly reminding Earth of what happened. But I'll argue that if they've studied history like I have, they better keep reminding Earth what happened. Because they don't want to show up as the group again. And so, history forgets. Ask the Serbians and the Bosnians, the Tutsi and the Hutu. Ask any Sunni and Shia Muslims today how important it is right now for their side to win. But then ask in 100 years. No one cares. We've learned nothing and forgotten everything. To the point that in 2,000 plus years, Alexander the Great is remembered for the wonderful accidental spreading of Hellenistic culture. By force, by killing. Maybe Charlemagne as well, this guy that was persuaded by the Pope for personal reasons, a Christian German or Frenchman, they argue over it, to spread Christianity by the fear of death. You don't join, you die. And, we thank him for the Europe we have today. The Germans, still revere him. Hitler named that the First Reich with Charlemagne. So, perhaps, the way we spread cultures, the way European slave owners attempted to do that to their African slaves. Have I offended you yet? Forcing human beings to become your culture. Please just understand, it's just the same old bullshit. Different wrapper. The fecal matter is still on the inside. We just try to cover the past with these gold-rimmed glasses and rose-colored lenses in an attempt to deal with how terrible humans have been. And we are progressing, we would hope. And don't get all angry and mad, tweet me first show. Jesus. Let's just discuss these topics. Talk them out. I once made a post on Facebook, and I said, I don't understand why Japan can still wave the rising sun flag and it be acceptable. Because that's the flag that they, raped Nanjing with. Where they, were throwing babies around from what the history says and catching them on bayonets and doing chemical warfare tests on Chinese people. And, of course, the raping of 10,000 women in a few months. But they still get to wave that flag. And somebody fought with me on Facebook. And it's weird. I don't know whether the internet just gives you balls you don't have. People don't discuss things on the internet anymore. They attack each other on the internet. It's become a special thing. Our future president was amazing at it. So maybe I'm the oddball that wants to talk stuff out. But if we're anything like history, if we go straight to war like we do on the internet, we're just as bad as all these people we criticize. We're no better. We're no better. So give me a break here and there, because this is Boyko's history through a bombshell. And I'm going to drop a few on you periodically. So, this is just a prologue episode. We're not getting into the topic, and we'll talk about the topic here. But the first thing I want to look at is just group dynamics. That's it. Groups. I'm sorry if that's going to bore you, but I don't think it will when we get into this. Because the aspect of groups, we as humans can come together in the most amazing ways. like the space race in the 60s, the International Space Station, landing on Mars, recent things. Or we can come together for some of the worst, like removing Jews from European society and the world. And so we start this identity aspect of groups when we're born. It's you and mom and dad, your family. And you stick by that family. And family is important. And then you progress. Maybe you go into smaller things like gender. The boys stick together, things like that in your families. And then maybe you can get into a town mentality. And gangs surely explain us that dichotomy, that idea. It makes me think of when I visited Germany back in 2003. I stayed with a family in this small town of Deinbach. I probably won't be able to find a picture of Deinbach on the internet. I'll have to find one that I took. And this town has just a few hundred people in it, and it's near this bigger city of Bad Mergentheim. This valley town, they are so Deinbach focused. They call themselves Deinbachers, or they call the town Dobok City. And when someone talks, they know exactly what town they're from. They're just like, oh, they're from Schweigern. I'm just like, how'd you know? And they said this word different. And I was, and just, if they can already see these differences in just the way they speak, the USA has nothing on this. If you have a New Yorker commenting on someone from Alabama, we're talking 3,000 miles of difference, not 7 kilometers down the street. And they live there because of the way they talk. So I just found this fascinating that this country, Germany, who's known for their German pride, collectively, good and bad, takes it all the way down to the town level. So this aspect of groups is just incredible to me. How amazing human beings are if we can just rally around people. And I'm gonna talk about the Homo sapiens now. It's claimed that we killed off or had a giant battle with the Neanderthal, and people, and we allowed ourselves this space and food access that we didn't have, and to be able to progress into us today, a few 100,000 years later, 100,000 years later. Do we feel our ancestors were terrible people? Do you look back and go, man, those early Homo sapiens were genocidal maniacs? Or has enough time passed that you look back and say, wow, I'm so glad we won. Look at what we've become. How do we judge such things so microscopically? Because humans do it. We look extremely close at things. And more on that later. So what promotes these groups to seek power? What promoted Homo sapiens to, take it to the Neanderthals? Was this just spreading out? Was it competition? In a hand-to-hand fight, we know that Yuval Noah Harari here in his new book Sapiens, he says in a hand-to-hand fight, you're going to lose as a Homo sapien to a Neanderthal. These are these massive, old humans, pre-humans, and then you have Homo sapiens that just outsmart them. Our technology beat Neanderthal. And so, what promotes us to do this? To seek enough to murder, to even kill off an entire group. What promotes that? Hitler once stated that he was surprised when the Anglo-Saxon whites of Britain and the United States, upon the completion of the war with France in 1940, he was surprised that Great Britain and the United States did not go to war with him against Russia. I'm saying on his team. There are memorandums saying, I'm trying to get the United States and Great Britain to go to war with Russia with me. And we hated communism too, folks. Look at the next 60, 70 years. And then why didn't we team up with him? By 1941, the camps aren't for Jews yet necessarily. The ghettos are definitely open. And we did have spies explaining this stuff, and Jews who escaped, explaining the hardships they were going throughout Germany and Poland, and the death squads. I'm fairly sure of already full swing. In fact, we know they were in 1939-40. But the camps that everyone remembers aren't even built yet. Auschwitz, is in process. Why didn't we join Hitler? Why didn't we say, that's right, screw the Russians, we don't like them either, communism is this terrible thing, and team up with them? Well, maybe it was because we thought him worse than Stalin, Yeah, I argue again that it wasn't because of the Jews, because we were about to put Asians in camps for internment out of distrust of Pearl Harbor, and do you think if our government knew, there's the hindsight, don't do, if our government knew what would happen in 1945 with Russia, the USSR, defeating Hitler and the Nazis and the German war ending, do you think we would have teamed up with Hitler and gone after the Russians first and then solved the European Nazi problem? I believe they would. I believe that a document kept us from teaming up with Hitler. Great Britain had already declared war, and Great Britain's our better friend, and I'm sure backdoor meetings, we decided that we would not help the Germans fight the Russians. And history, of course, continued. But, Hitler's thing was based on race. The white Germans, the white British, the white Americans. Race is too easy. I'm gonna give you a challenge here. I'm a high school teacher. I could surely convince a group of diverse teenagers, black, white, Hispanic, Asian. That's what I have a very diverse school that I'm in, to team up and physically harm another group of diverse teenagers for no other reason than I'm their high school coach. And I've convinced them that this game on Friday is life or death. This is it. We either win or lose, boys. That other team is out to kill you. You need to kill them. Let's go. I can do this weekly, too. I have a new enemy form every Friday. New enemy. And we build that energy for a week against that new enemy. And I would argue that if I have enough of their trust, that I may even be able to convince them to compete with the intent to permanently injure those other boys who, by the way, they have more in common with each other than they do with me. White coach, diverse team. It's incredible, absolutely incredible and interesting and powerful, this idea of group dynamics. And the moment a single race fights, his or her own race, are they not sacrificing to their more important group dynamic? I find that fascinating, because if it comes down to it, they would say, and we make them bubble their group on the SAT, we make them bubble their group. On college applications, what group are you with? I'm black, I'm white, I'm Hispanic. We force them into those groups. It's very interesting stuff. And so now I want to discuss the larger group mentality of humans here. This idea of drawing lines and keeping others out of them. It's amazing to me. From the moment we put these lines on the maps, and we've done it for a very long time. Draw a line on a map, and we don't cross it. If you cross it, we got to talk. But don't these lines just set us up for failure? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not a full-blown utopist who thinks that we'll ever be rid of these divisional lines. But imagine what they do. They create division. And sometimes you need them, like with ancient China and the wall protecting them. And then in the Berlin Wall, sometimes it's not even your choice. It's put there against you. But please don't take me as I'm not as naive to think that we don't need them. It's a catch-22 if you ask me. We We separate ourselves out of protection, but those protective aspects hurt us sometimes in the long run. So, let me just take it when I was 10 years old. Me and my little brother, let's say he's 7 at the time, I think. And we start fighting, and you know what? Screw this. I go get the blue painter's tape, and I tape down our bedroom. We shared a bedroom. I put a line in the bedroom and say, you're on that side, and I'm on this side. And of course, the Nintendo is on my side with the television. So he can't play it. Ha ha ha. Joke's on him. And we yell at each other, and whatever. He pouts on the bed. And then somewhere along the way, he remembers, the bed's on my side. There's a bunk bed. And then we have another fight, and I'm just like, oh, crap, this is stupid. And we make peace. And now I don't have to sleep on the floor. Will Earth remove these pieces of tape someday? Isn't it inevitable that we will progress to a point where, I don't know, that we even need it, that we have to fight it all? Because we've had some fights. We've had some fights over these lines. Every country. And maybe we haven't had a big enough fight to make us face this reality yet, the lines on a map. Do we need just simply some adult solutions, if we use the metaphor of children drawing lines of tape? And where are these adult solutions? And countries maybe require this. We even make states inside our countries. Most countries of the world have states, whether it's, territories or sections. Maybe Earth's in its teens. And just we've tried a bunch of childlike solutions, like communism, we found it doesn't work so well with humans and the need to compete. So, and maybe socialism only works in homogenous societies, which are fleeting fast. I don't think there'll be a place on the world where people haven't moved in 50 years. Even Finland, Scandinavia area, they're going to be less homogenous. Is democracy this childlike fantasy? Teen fantasy where we all vote on what to do? And then, with that aspect, a country with a certain birth rate may decide it's not a good idea at all. So where are these solutions, and are there even remotely perfect ones in this experiment of humanity? I like to say it's this big experiment. And in the setting metaphor, as teens, we think we know everything. So we think we figured it all out. I would argue that the UN is just as a lesson as much as the League of Nations was. We have not mastered how to handle Earth, because we tend to have to watch as the UN. You can't tell me I can't go to the dance. I'm going to do it anyways and rebel. Teens. Are we there? Are we fighting? Because we just react. And when are we going to achieve adulthood? Because I'm telling you guys, we have some tough lessons ahead. Think of stem cell regeneration. And we already have this lifespan of an aging human, skyrocketing. Stem cells, or even these robotic implants, forget it. We're going to live to be 200-300 years old. Or is it the social arguments for the expanding planet? Who gets to stay on it if we start to, move to Mars? Or who gets forced off, like Europe in the colonial period? And is genetic engineering going to lead us to the Ubermensch that everyone was so adamant to avoid? Are we all going to become this hybrid of data, and DNA? It's fascinating to me. My knees hurt constantly. I would love a robotic knee. Are you kidding me? Shit. My lower back, if you could remove pain receptors and put something in there that, of course, doesn't need to know if I'm in pain, sold. So, either way, we're stuck here, fuming in this teen angst, and hating the parental creators for not giving us the blueprint of how to grow up, or not accepting the ones that we've actually found out. Where we'll fail and where we'll succeed. And in our failures, will there be speed bumps? Or will it be something that puts us on our ass for 1,000 years? You know, the Middle Ages, not counting how wonderful the Middle East was doing, but if you take Europe as a whole, the Middle Ages were a knock. Imagine if Europe and the Middle East, the Ottoman, area, the golden age of Islam would have worked together instead of fought. Where we would be today? We would have been on the moon years ago. 100 years ago. The Renaissance would have happened, in 900 versus 1300. And I'm gonna hope that we get over these speed bumps. There will not be roadblocks. We cannot allow them to be roadblocks. Even if we nuke each other, yes, our ancestors will be walking around wondering what happened to those people who built these amazing things. But we'll still pull through it. Now, that'd be a hell of a speed bump, though. But I'm going to single in on a certain moment in history right now. A moment that grabbed me by its immensity as a moment in history. And it opened a whole bag of questions to me from teenage years all the way into still here in the 30s. And that's the time period following World War I and how the world, they decided they would carve up the earth at the Treaty of Versailles. And who got to do it? The bunch of old white men who didn't even fire a shot in that 4-year conflict. They sit down and they decide what happens to Earth. And everyone respects them so much for winning this war that they have to kowtow to them. People from all over the world. I'm going to read you guys a quote, and it's from the foreword to a book by Margaret Macmillan called August 1919, 6 Months That Changed the World. But this is the foreword by Richard Holbrooke. Richard Holbrooke's one of the U.S. greatest diplomats, it says. And he's speaking about a meeting in Paris to end World War I, and he explains, quote, "The cast of characters that assembled in Paris in 1919 was remarkable. From Lawrence of Arabia to a small Vietnamese kitchen hand later known as Ho Chi Minh. And for the first time in history, an American stood at the center of a great world drama." Woodrow Wilson has become such a figure in the world. And I would say his 14 points opened up a whole can of worms that I think even he regretted it. So I want you to listen here to one of Wilson's 14 points. This is point 5. And I want you to imagine being Ho Chi Minh, this short order cook in New York City, traveling to France. I think he's been in France for a little while by this time. And he's begging to meet with Woodrow Wilson, all because of this point. Point 5. A free, open-minded, and absolute impartial adjustment of all colonial claims, based upon a strict observance of the principle that in determining all such questions of sovereignty, the interests of the populations concerned must have equal weight with the equitable government whose title is to be determined. If you are Ho Chi Minh, if you are the Balkans, if you are islands off of Italy, Croatian, Serbian, you're still hoping the Serbs got what they wanted out of this. Japan, everyone is begging the four masters of Europe for what they will give them, and they're begging Woodrow Wilson to follow through on what he said in the 14 points. And the 14 points, guys, we're talking back in 1916 or 17. This is even before he's in the war. And if Woodrow Wilson could have deleted that point and just had the 13 points, he probably would have done it after what it cost throughout the world and all of those people he did not expect to show up at the Treaty of Versailles. So let's continue with the final closing here of the 14 points. And by the way, man down, every country of the world would have read this document, guys. Every country of the world was watching what was happening in Paris. So he said, this is Woodrow Wilson, quote, "We have spoken now, surely in terms too concrete to admit any further doubt or question. An evident principle runs through the whole program I have outlined. It is the principle of justice to all peoples and nationalities, and their right to live on equal terms of liberty and safety with one another, whether they be strong or weak. Unless this principle be made its foundation, no part of the structure of international justice can stand. The people of the United States could act upon no other principle, and to the vindication of this principle they are ready to devote their lives, their honor, and everything that they possess. The moral climax to this, the culminating and final war for human liberty has come, and they are ready to put their own strength, their own highest purpose, their own integrity and devotion to the test. End quote. Wow. Can you imagine being these people and reading this statement? Do you see why Ho Chi Minh made this trip all the way to Paris if he wasn't there already? Do you see why people from these unheard of places took their entire existence to go and attempt to create a new one for their people? Now let me return to Holbrook's foreword. So Richard Holbrooke, quote, "Through the fog of this never-ending debate, one thing is clear. As Wilson arrived in France in December 1918, he ignited great hopes, and throughout the world with his stirring 14 points, especially the groundbreaking concept of self-determination." End quote. This is a new section. Quote is Richard Holbrooke again. "Yet Wilson, often ill-informed or badly prepared for detailed negotiations, seemed vague as to what his own phrase actually meant." And this is Wilson being quoted. "When I gave utterance to those words," he admitted later, "I said them without the knowledge that nationalities existed, which are coming to us day after day." End all the quotes. Even at this time, it was recognized that the concept of self-determination was, as Macmillan puts it, controversial and opaque. We're still quoting Richard Holbrooke here. When the president talks of self-determination, Secretary of State Robert Lansing asked, what unit has he in mind? Does he mean a race, a territorial area, a community? It will raise hopes which can never be realized. It will, I fear, cost thousands of lives, and in the end it is bound to be discredited, to be called the dream of an idealist who failed to realize the danger until it was too late. Poor Woodrow Wilson. The guy had just absolute dreams. And, was he ahead of his time or was he just a moron? Say anything to end this war and then we'll deal with it later. And sometimes he sounds like a moron when he says, I didn't realize what this would do. But there are thousands of lives still being spent for this idea of making a line for yourself. That's it. Put a line on the map for me. The idea of identity will never go away. From Hitler's excuse to enter Czechoslovakia and the subsequent giving of it to him to avoid war, to the dismantling of the Ukraine right now for much similar reasons. This does not mean then that since it's based on culture and language that Miami, Florida should be divided equally by neighborhoods and Cuba should get part of Miami and Jamaica should get part of Miami and Haiti should get part of Miami and the United States can't say a damn thing because that's who lives there. And the countries all accept it's theirs. And will that mean Mexico deserves part of their territory back because of the populations that exist in Texas? There's a 2-point reason there. And I'm going to continue with Richard Holbrooke here. Quote, some of the most intractable problems of the modern world have roots in decisions made right after the end of the Great War. Among them, one could list the 4 Balkan Wars between 1991 and 1999. The crisis over Iraq, whose present borders resulted from Franco-British rivalries and casual map-making. Poor Kurds. The continuing quest of the Kurds for self-determination. Disputes between Greece and Turkey, and the endless struggle between Arabs and Jews over land that each thought had been promised them. End quote. What do we do, guys? I implore all of you and my students who continue to listen to this as the future of the world, never ignore these things happening on the other side of these imaginary lines. They affect you. They're important. Russia matters. France matters. Great Britain matters. China matters. The Philippines matter. The islands being built in the Pacific, South China Sea, they're going to matter. You think that just piling dirt up in the ocean is no big deal? Ask that in 10 years when we're bombing them. Every little country on the planet matters. Because if you're in a classroom within one of those countries, guys, even a small one like the Philippines, they're proud of being Filipino. You know, they're proud of their islands, and they would fight if they had to defend those islands. So at the moment, lines matter. And please pay attention to them and the people that live within them. You know, because if you do that, maybe we'll be able to remove them someday. Everyone just move around free. It would take some special government. And when I say special government, I mean one we haven't figured out yet. You know, democracy's based on population. Socialism's based on the top bringing up the bottom, and when people move around, the bottom is stronger. Communism, still don't think that'll work. Sorry, guys. Still don't think it'll work. So, in the next show, as we wrap up this show, we're going to progress into this topic that I've been wanting to do. And it's going to be long. I'm going to spend hours on this topic for y'all. I'm going to go into, you know, the life of Hitler and the entire history of the Third Reich. And we're going to look at this topic from normal perspectives and then from an entirely different perspective. The big history I was telling you about. And hopefully it'll be one that'll intrigue you and make you want to keep watching. And I hope the first show here was somewhat intriguing. And in the end, you will see that all that is relative and that perspective is the key to history. So, I'll see y'all in the future.